welcome back to Examining Life, a life that's worth living. My name is Amanda. Thank you so much for tuning in to today's episode. This is part 2 of my conversation with Dereck, in which we discuss economics in Trinidad. And if you haven't seen part 1, you can click the link up here where we talk about history and politics. Okay, time to sit back and enjoy part 2. So you mentioned the oil refinery a bit. Can you expand a little bit more on that, just in general, not necessarily as it relates to the coup, but how the oil refinery impacts the Trinidad's economy?
Well, the economy had been, since the late 60s to early 70s, based on petroleum and petroleum products, because Trinidad, because of its location, and there's a school of thought that Trinidad at one time, many years ago, may have been part of the mainland, South America. Therefore, that's why they have oil. Right now, if you consider that Guyana all of a sudden has discovered oil, there may be some merit to that, because you find now you don't have reserves of oil in some of the other Caribbean countries that aren't as far south as Trinidad. So when there was the discovery of oil in Trinidad, of course, we can imagine now fortunes change, right? And in 1970, we were now oil rich. We would not have immediately had the expertise. So you find a lot of expat firms came in, like the Amacos, right? Some had existed here with regards to service stations, because we had at one time as many as 5 or 6 expat companies. We had BP before they merged with Amoco. You had Shell, you had Esso, which predates Exxon, I think. They would have built the refinery. And you find the benefit of that to Trinidad is that there are some countries, I think even in Africa, they have oil and they drill for oil and stuff, but they don't refine their own oil. So, if you can have the additional benefit of refining your oil, therefore you're more in control with how much of a piece of the pie you get, shipping your oil out and have it refined at another location. That's how the refinery, and then you have the downstream industries from having a refinery, and how much, because the government is the biggest employer of the country, right, the state, so we talk about public servants and so on. But then there was a movement to nationalize a lot of the either expat companies or what have been, so they started to do that, and therefore reap all the benefits that would have probably gone out for the nation and stuff. So they had a fertilizers company, which was with conversion of some of the byproducts of refinery, urea, into fertilizers. A lot later on, you had the natural gas developing, so you had that as another source of income. So you find oil has been really good to us, and also part of an issue otherwise, because then you didn't develop some of the other areas you would have had. So Trinidad, because of its location, and we don't have, from our topography, white sandy beaches, we're not normally first stop. I mean, Tobago is a lot more like that, but Trinidad has been more or less an industrial nation. So you find we don't have all these powdery beaches and resorts and stuff like that, because we were focused on the money made from oil and oil-based products. So that is what was developed. But what happened in that case, as I said, we didn't develop some of the other areas. And as we know now, the whole idea of fossil fuel is becoming a thing of the past, and soon it wouldn't even ride as far as it's riding now. With the advent of OPEC too, and that got out in the 70s, we find that the cost of oil, a barrel of oil, was phenomenal. So all that brought in tons of riches to the country.
What does Trinidad have to do in order to further the diversification of its economy?
Well, that's just it. We probably wouldn't totally move away from oil and oil base. I mean, having natural resources is a plus, so I mean, we need to use it. And after oil, really and truly, with the discovery of a lot of gas, right, and natural gas being another form of fuel, found that was also something that brought in a lot of income.
Okay.
But with regards to diversification, the thing is, um, if I can refer to Barbados' Prime Minister, Mia Mottley, I think she's been a voice that says the Caribbean needs to be more than sandy beaches and that kind of thing, because we have a lot more to offer. So Trinidadians and Togolese and other people from the diaspora in the Caribbean have had major people who contributed other than, so in art, in dance, and stuff like that. And I've always thought, this is just a personal opinion, that Trinidad probably should have not gone the way of trying to be Jamaica and so on, who, where they located, close to the US and stuff like that, they would normally be the number one choice. However, what we have is a lot of natural beauty, so that, and festivals, because of our diversity in our populace, you find that, and it's unfortunate, as you said, you came during COVID times, almost every other month there is a festival. But we don't promote our festivals. People go to Germany to drink beer and eat sausage, and that's a festival. So we have the Pagua, because we have a huge East Indian culture, and they would have brought over some of their traditions. We have, because of diversity, we have a fairly good-sized Chinese, specifically, that had come over at some time. Trinidad is one of those, just like the rest of the Caribbean, you had these different groups of people coming over, and a lot stayed, and a lot of the traditions we still have. So we observe double 10, right, which is 10/10, October, right, and some of it occurs in the food, so you'll see that the culture being shared there. We have a Syrian Lebanese group, it's small, so I've always said that why are we not promoting that aspect rather than trying to compete? Beaches, we don't have the, okay, Barbados has limestone, so it's naturally white and powdery and all this kind of thing. So that's not us, we don't have that, so we need to have, like, Dominica promotes a lot of hiking. It's a very hilly area, so they have a lot of rivers, and they have a mini rainforest and stuff like that. Trinidad also has that with regards to, I don't know if you got an opportunity to see how much birds we have.
Yeah, I saw some.
Right. You would have probably seen hummingbirds. If you go up into, let's say, some of the remote areas and stuff, you see a lot of naturally occurring rivers, wildlife, things like that. So those are the things we can push. That ecotourism that happens in Costa Rica, those places, that needs to be the focus, as well as innovation and technology. The way forward is not to only depend on your natural resources and stuff like that. There are major countries that have no natural resources, but yet they were leaders in certain things, technologies and things like that. As I said, soon fossil fuel will be a thing of the past, and it wouldn't bring into the coffers as much as it has traditionally.
Why did Japan decide to produce steel pan drums instead of having them like produced here, or like what were the differences in the types of production? And was this considered like cultural appropriation? Were they like taking the culture, or like what was their role in terms of that?
Well, let me just clarify. I mentioned Japan, but they weren't the only ones to set up steel manufactories.
Sure.
Steel factories were set up in Australia, right, and other places in Europe and so on. The problem with understanding the steel band is understanding the history of the instrument. Steel band came out of post-slavery days, after the Tambo Bamboo movement, where the slaves, I guess, with the revelry of being, right, had developed, it started with the bamboo and drums. Steel band was actually banned at one time because it was associated with a certain income level deviance in society. So it was like, okay, if you're a steel band man, it meant that you possibly was a member of gang. If you was a parent, you didn't want your girl children to hook up with any steel band man because of what that meant and stuff like that. I mean, steel band now is a far cry from what it was. And then you had those clashes which were predominant in those days, and talking about actual violent clashes between rival steel bands and things like that. So the problem with the steel band, however, and I think it exists with other stuff in developing nations, the whole issue of intellectual property is an issue. If if you have to research it to see who actually made the steel band or developed the steel band, you'll get a series of people. It's normally accredited to Winston Simon because I think he brought it in a particular form with 8 notes and stuff like that. Other people contributed and so on. But because the history is so marred and how it started, right, amongst, let's say, the grassroots people and stuff like that, they would have no idea about patents and intellectual property and so on. So they were just happy, well, here's this instrument. But as you know, if you don't protect it, then anybody can come. So I mentioned Japanese because they tend to be good duplicators, and they would have seen the instrument. It's the only instrument developed in the 21st century, the only new instrument. They haven't been any other. So they would have seen where they could have contributed, and therein lies some of the issues in that, okay, they didn't develop the pan in its original form, but they would have added something to it, right? And other countries, they would have added something to it. So like the pan sticks, that was Eddie Manette who developed the pan stick, which I don't know if you've seen a steel pan stick. It's a piece of wood with a rubber. He developed the rubber because it softens how the nose plays. We could think about it. Without that, it would be very harsh, right? They started to develop it from an industrial nation point of view. So they were like, okay, instead of having a guy, because the original way of steel pan is that a guy with a tuning fork bellows out the top of the pan and he knocks it until he gets the notes like the tuning fork and stuff like that. Then they use fire to fire it up and to come to the finished product. From an industrial point of view, industrialization, we're accustomed to factories and stuff like that. It's like, this is archaic and we can do this better. So that is where we've always been challenged with regards to, so the government has at the time actually challenged patent issues with other countries trying to claim the steel ban, and so far they have been relatively successful, but until I think internationally, because we are known internationally as the birthplace, but you know, IP issues are always one of those issues that will, I guess, continue to exist unless we could clearly have patent law is temporary anyway. You can have an exclusive patent only for a period of time, and soon other people will be able to put out maybe their own versions of steel band. Maybe they'll call it something else. But locally, I'm glad to say we have developed a few, not mass amounts of steel band factories. So now you can actually go and buy a finished steel band. I mean, you don't have to go and get your own drum and take it to a guy living behind the bridge to hollow it out and stuff like that. You actually have factories that produce, because when you consider for the carnival, and I'm so sorry you didn't see how it's supposed to be, that panorama that I think you went to, it's normally 100+ strong members with all these bands.
Wow.
And it's quite a lot of bands, so you can imagine the amount of steel bands for the festival and otherwise, right? So that's really the issue with regards to steel bands and steel band and its part. It will continue to be a little contentious with regards to other countries able to appropriate it, but one thing is sure, if you check any book, the fact that it was born and treated here, nobody argues that fact.
Please explain a little bit about like the foreign investments in Trinidad. You mentioned in terms of the refinery, no longer, but prior there was like Shell and Exxon and the different oil companies and whatnot. Like, what are the prominent industries or countries that invest in Trinidad, and what are some ethical issues surrounding this topic?
What happens now more than ever is kind of joint ventures, because with the reduction in oil monies, you need to probably depend on an investor to come in, much like any investment that may happen where you have ghost investors, or you have those that are venture capitalists or stuff like that. They see the opportunity and they come in. There are certain rules that they have to conform to. So I think you can invest in stock, but you have like a limit to the amount you can invest. Or there are times when you have to actually get a license to be able to invest more than a certain amount. You can also invest in companies, meaning form partnerships with companies. So you may have seen driving around, you'll see familiar brands. Coca-Cola happened to be one of those, and what happened is that you had a percentage owned by a local and the rest owned by the foreign.
Mm-hmm.
So that is something that's regular all over the world, and that will continue. Recently, we had some investment from countries like China, where they would have contributed to the building of major structures, parks. We were once building bauxite or aluminium smelter plant. And the reason why you invite foreign investment, normally they'll take humongous capital investment, and we're still a small island nation, so we probably can't afford it. But any investment has to have a return on investment. So the question is sometimes, whether the return on investment is too high a price, then what the investment may actually benefit. Because any investment, you want to benefit the people of the nation as a whole. Of course, those will be some of the concerns with any investment, but the Caribbean, not just Trinidad, has opened their arms to some foreign investment simply because, as I said, as small nations, they don't have the money. So it's a part that they sometimes take so that they can then progress the nation from a capital investment point of view, education, technology, those kind of things. So right now we're going to have an investment because I was talking to a couple of people and they were probably at the beginning of it with regards to the use of sustainable communities, because we have never invested in solar energy. That is an area, oil reserves and oil that you need to. It's something that we would have signed on as a nation. All nations who signed this accord supposed to have certain things. It's a view to reducing things like poverty, being able to sustain yourself, and all these other social issues, take the world, climate change, things like that. All of these are issues that are on the table, and you find that we, just like any other developing country, have signed on and taken on people to invest so that we could progress some of these ventures.
Speaking more domestically now, what are some of the prominent domestic companies that contribute a lot to the economy? Like, I've seen Massey all over Trinidad. That seems to be a very prominent company.
Yeah.
So that is like in different sectors. If you want to speak a little bit about Massey or any other like very prominent.
Well, Massey has been one of the older companies, and Massey is not just Trinidadian, it's Caribbean. So they have extended where you find Massey all over the Caribbean. And what happened is that they divested into many different sectors. So my first recollection as a child as Massey was Massey Motors, and they brought in the Nissan brand, so that was them. As companies grow, obviously they saw opportunities, so they involved in energy, they involved in transportation, they involved in office products and stuff like that. Would you believe only when they changed the name to Massey, we realized how many the parent company had, because each one had a different name. So you're unawares unless you were close to the information that they owned everything. So when they changed and they had a major name change, you were like, they into that too. So they are major conglomerates. Where the Caribbean on a whole started to move, and Trinidad probably a little after the others, was we needed to become less production, more service based. So you find now the investment is in a lot more of the service area, which is not an area we have been accustomed to. So there was a spate of it after, let's say, the oil money in the 70s, where we had all these brands of food places coming in, but then as soon as the economy changed, it didn't make sense, so they left. A lot of them are back. So 10 years ago, we didn't have a McDonald's here, because they tried and they failed. We didn't have Starbucks, and that is some of, and it leads to what you're talking about, some of the investment that happened. See all these names that are traditionally American based coming into. Obviously, it has to be viable for them to have come in. Probably is, because now they exist, Church's Chicken and all these brand names and stuff like that, these franchise based, right, businesses. So they proliferate the place right now, and the you would see them across the landscape anywhere you drive.
Thank you so much for taking the time to tell me more about Trinidad's history and economy. Any closing remarks?
Well, only from the perspective, I hope our interaction kind of helps you with understanding who we are. I know you've spent, as you say, better part of a month, so I hope I've lent some understanding to some of your interactions you would have had, so now you understand some of our history and who we are. And I know, thanks for coming, spending time with us. We don't often have a lot of visitors, especially in COVID. So it was great that you were able to come all this way, and we're better for it. So.
Awesome. Thank you. And to anyone watching, I highly recommend coming to Trinidad. It's an amazing country, very friendly, and so much to learn and see here. And thank you so much for taking the time to speak with me today.